Hello, my name is Christy Alexson. I'm the 2018 WIFS Woman of the Year and CEO of Single Point Financial Advisors. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Superhuman Success Strategies, presented by David Whitley. Just a quick note regarding Q&A. Questions or comments can be typed into the question box located to the side of the presentation at any time. Questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation as time permits. Iron Tamer Dave Whitley is a motivational speaker, success coach, and performing strongman based in Nashville, Tennessee. He uses feats of strength to illustrate his message of mind development and goal achievement. His purpose is to educate, entertain, and inspire others to discover and develop their own unique superhuman powers and become the greatest possible version of themselves. You can visit his website at irontamer.com. Please join me in welcoming David.
Thanks, Chris. Very happy to be here. All right. Are we ready to go then? We're good?
Yes, we are. It's all you.
All right. Oh, so it's all me. Okay. All right. Thank you. So, superhuman success strategies. My name's Iron Tamer Dave Whitley, as Christy said, and I'm a performing strongman and motivational speaker. And I want to talk to you today about a particular approach of goal setting and, more importantly, goal achieving that kind of goes in line with the beginning of the year. Everybody sets resolutions and sets yearly goals. And as most of us are painfully aware, we sometimes fall pretty short on that, usually within the first few weeks of the year. So what I want to do is provide you with some strategies and tools that you can use to achieve goals that you set for yourself this year and beyond, with a proven success formula that we'll go into detail with during the course of this talk. The initial slide that we have here is the cover of a book that I wrote called Superhuman You, where I outline all this. And let's just get straight on into it. The first thing you may be wondering is, who am I? Who is this guy, and why is he qualified to talk to us about this stuff? Well, I was a stuttering kid. I was overweight. I had a horrible, horrible stutter when I was in grammar school. And it was to the point that when the teacher would call on me in class, I would get almost physically ill at the idea of having to stand up in front of the class and speak. I retreated into a world of comic books and fantasy and superheroes, that kind of stuff, and dreamed of having these superhuman powers. So specifically for me, it was superhuman strength. And I can, with confidence, say now that I am, in fact, a superhuman. And I know that's a bold claim, but I can qualify it. We have here on the slides a photo of me breaking a number 6 jack chain with a chest expansion, not using my hands. It's an incredibly painful feat of strength, very difficult to do, and that's just one of many feats of strength that I've dedicated my physical training to. I use these feats of strength in the context of motivational speaking to help other people understand that the method that I use to get to be able to do these feats and to get over the stutter that I had apply to pretty much any goal that you would want to set for yourself. For me, it all started with this guy here. When I was a stuttering kid and reading these comic books and watching televisions, I really wanted to be the Hulk. And in particular, when the television series started in the mid-70s, Lou Ferrigno comes on, and I knew in my little 8-year-old mind that that was not a costume. That was a man who was painted up wearing makeup. But something flipped in my mind when I saw this man on screen that let me know that it was not just a fantasy to be big and strong like a comic book character, but that people could actually do it. Not too long after that, I saw Ferrigno in the movie Pumping Iron along with Arnold Schwarzenegger and a bunch of other bodybuilders from that time, and realized that the way to achieve this was through lifting weights. I had literally opened up the classified of the newspaper at the time and was looking for how to get bombarded with gamma radiation to turn into the Hulk before I found the movie Pumping Iron and was introduced to the idea of lifting weights. I got a set of weights for Christmas that year and have been interested in strength ever since. Now, along the way, I came to realize, of course, that those particular kinds of superpowers were not something that we could achieve, but superhuman strength is something that I could achieve. And so, very briefly, I want to tell you about my lineage in how I came to become a performing strongman. There's a guy named the Mighty Atom. Here's a photo of him driving a nail through a board. And he was born in Poland in 1893 and was only about 5'5" and about 145 pounds. And so he was a very, very odd strongman for the time. He was vaudeville era strongman, early 1900s. And the quote from his biography that really lodged itself in my mind when I first started learning about him is here on the screen. Never inhibit yourself with the seemingly impossible. If you place no limits upon yourself, you will have none. And if you think that you're strong, then you are. And someone pointed out to me along the way that you could pull out the word strong and plug in any other word that you feel like sticking in there. If you think that you're wealthy, if you think that you're poor, if you think that you're weak, whatever it is, if you plug it in there, then that's what you will become. So the mental aspect of these physical feats started to take root in my mind very early. Now, the Mighty Atom passed away in 1977. And for several decades of his life, he had a protege, a guy named Lawrence Farman, whose stage name was Slim the Hammerman. Now, here's a photo of Slim back when he was younger. He's in his 80s now. Still one of the strongest men that you would ever hope to meet. Very dynamic and charismatic guy. And I'm fortunate that not only is Slim an inspiration to me, but he's also a friend and a mentor. And he actually taught me quite a bit about the craft of being a strongman. And the quote that I want to give you guys today from him is, it's not that you don't have the power, it's that you can't get to the power because of fear. The power's there inside you. The question is, how do you bring it out? Now, Slim was talking about physical strength and expressing power physically. But the more I learn about this stuff, the more I come to understand that there's an even greater power than the ability to express strength physically. And that, again, is why we're here today. Next on the list is my direct teacher, Dennis Rogers. Most of you may have seen him on television sometime in the past 20 years or so. And there's a photo of him with a wrench that he bent and a photo of him and myself. And very early in my training with him, he says to me, you must remove all doubt and limitation from your mind because the mind controls the body. Well, I took that to heart, and I realized that all of these very strong men who were inspirations and examples for me were telling me this vital importance of the mental side of everything that we do. So I took it upon myself to learn as much as I could about my mind and how it works in a very practical, applicable to day-to-day life sense, not in terms of theoretical psychology or anything like that, but what can I do with the tools that I have now in my mind to achieve what I want to achieve? So that led me down the path of learning a lot of information from what I call mind masters. And I ran across this quote in a book, and it's, whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve, which sounds remarkably like the same information that the strongmen are telling me along the way. But this isn't from a strongman. It's not from an athlete of any sort. In fact, it's from a guy named Napoleon Hill, who most of you are probably familiar with. If not, I would recommend you get familiar with him. He wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich, which is one of the most prolific and well-known books on not only achieving wealth, but personal development that I've ever run across. Through studying Napoleon Hill, I was introduced to the works of a guy named Bob Proctor, first in the movie The Secret in about 2006. And from then on, I have studied his material. From Bob Proctor, I learned a great deal about how my mind works and how specifically the paradigms that reside in my subconscious mind direct my behavior. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. And then another guy that had a big impact on me was a guy named Joe Vitale. And from Joe Vitale, who was also in the movie The Secret, I learned a tremendous amount about the importance and the power of gratitude and forgiveness. Those are two very, very powerful, very important states of mind to bring into daily life. Now, I met Joe online a few years ago, and he actually reached out to me because he was a fan of what I was doing as a strongman. And when I told him that I was a fan of what he did, we hit it off, and he actually became a student of mine. And here we have a photo of Joe Vitale, who had inspired me at one point to study about my mind. And he's holding a piece of steel that he bent in a training session that we had together. So it was really, really fun and really cool for me to be able to give something like that back to someone who had inspired me so much. And what we can see here is an underlying theme that all of these strong men, all of these mind masters are saying something that is very, very similar. And that is, when we boil it down, we become what we think about. Whatever thoughts dominate our mind wind up becoming not only the filter through which we see the world, but also the means by which we create our day-to-day life. And so for me, knowing that this is true, if I wanted to become superhuman, it meant that I needed to learn how to think superhuman thoughts. I needed to learn how to think like a superhuman. And at this point, you may be thinking, hey, that's great, but what does that have to do with me? Well, just through what I was able to do with getting my mind right, as I like to say, I was eventually able to meet Lou Ferrigno, my initial inspiration, face to face, because I was at an event that he was at and I was there performing. So we managed to bring it full circle. I'm very, very pleased about that. So that goal had kind of always been deep, deep in my mind, but I never really thought of it as being impossible to get to meet Lou Ferrigno. And it turns out that I actually was not only met him, but I wound up being in a movie with him, not in scenes with him, but I was in a documentary called Kraft Acht, which some German filmmakers made back in 2012. And Lou was in it and I was in it. So that was a childhood dream and vision that was fulfilled later on, really because of my focus mentally on where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, and who I wanted to be. So what does that have to do with you? I'm glad you asked. This process that I used to develop these feats of strength and to be able to attain these particular things, these physical expressions, will work for any goal that you have set for yourself, be it financial, be it with your own health and fitness and strength, be it with your relationships. And those are really the three big areas that people come to me and ask me for guidance in, or when I do coaching with them. It's their health and fitness, their relationships, and their financial stuff. But ultimately, they want to discover and develop their own superhuman powers, because what that means, if we look at superheroes in the comic books, is, or in the movies or whatever, is this power that allows someone to fully express who they are, to live a full and happy life, and to make the world a better place. So yeah, we may not be able to have X-ray vision or fly through the air or any of those sorts of superhuman powers, but when we take those powers that we already have innate within us, then we can develop them into something that makes the world a better place and allows us to fully express ourselves. And that's what I'm concerned with. Now, we're told from a very young age how to be successful. And usually that advice looks something like, well, you have to try really hard in order to be successful. And you have to put in a lot of effort, which is sort of redundant after trying really hard. You know, it's all kind of the same thing. And you have to outwork your competition. That's a big one. You know, there's someone who is your competition who is already up and they're already an hour ahead of you today doing whatever it is that you're attempting to be successful at. And so in order to get ahead, you have to outwork your competition. You have to do more and do more, do more. You have to give 110%. I just lost my slides. I apologize for that. I don't know what happened. Pull them right back up. Give 110%, do more to outwork your competition. And this is based in the idea that hard work equals success, that the harder you work, the more successful you're going to be. And we all buy into it. Um, the celebration of the grind and the wearing of how stressed out we are as almost as a badge of honor, expecting success because we are in fact working so hard. And then, of course, from a very young age, we're told that what really matters is that you tried as hard as you could. And that really doesn't match up with the rest of what we're saying there. So I'm going to go ahead and say that all of that falls into the category of this image that we have here. It is the part of the cow that we don't want around us to keep it nice and clean. Because trying harder does not bring better results. And if we think that what really matters, or all that really matters, is that we tried as hard as we could, if you go in to a doctor and you have some sort of problem and they're unable to solve that problem and you remain sick and they say, well, we're really sorry, but we tried as hard as we could, that really doesn't matter much to you, does it? It doesn't matter how much effort is being put into it. Because what is effort? Let's talk about effort a little bit. Strenuous physical or mental exertion. That's what effort is. We talk about working really hard. We put a lot of mental effort into something, we put a lot of physical effort into something, and we think that because we do that, we're going to reap some sort of benefit. But everything comes at a cost. And more effort, does it actually equal greater results? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. More effort definitely equals a greater cost, though. So the more effort we put into something, the more we have to sacrifice or give up or potentially even lose, with no guarantee of results. Now, I want you to think about this. When we take, say, a flower, and we take the seed from that flower and we plant it in the soil and we water it and we then leave it alone. We water it when we need to, or if we plant it out in the garden, we don't even need to water it. We just plant it. It grows and it does what it's supposed to do, and it comes up out of the ground and it blossoms with no apparent effort. It just does what it's supposed to do. I don't think the flower is thinking about how much effort it has to put into growing and blossoming. I have a son who's 11 weeks old today, and he's gained several pounds since we brought him home from the hospital. He hasn't put any effort into that. It's just what happens because we are providing the environment that he needs to be successful. So more effort always equals a greater cost. Sometimes you might get greater results out of it, but not always. And I want you in your mind to finish this phrase that I just put up on the screen. If at first you don't succeed, and I'm going to say that the majority of the people who are listening and reading that finished that phrase with try again. Well, I'm going to offer you a different ending to that phrase. And I would hope that you'll take this into consideration and that you will start applying it to your life. If at first you don't succeed, come up with a better plan. If at first you don't succeed, come up with a better plan. Because if you didn't succeed, that means that somewhere in your plan there was a flaw. Now, it might have been that you weren't putting enough effort into the plan, but more often than not, it's that the plan was faulty. Because how many of us have decided that we wanted to accomplish something and started working on it without a good plan, and then in a very short period of time given up on it because we thought the plan didn't work, when in fact it may be that the plan was just faulty to begin with and had nothing to do with the amount of effort that we were putting into it. When we get unwanted results, that's what happens. We get unwanted results from faulty plans. Now, I want you to consider this question very carefully. Are you smarter than a fly? Hopefully, everyone said yes. Now, I want you to, if you can, if you're not driving or anything, I want you to close your eyes and imagine this situation for a few minutes. You're in a room, and on one side of the room, there's a glass window that's closed, and it's a big window, big window, big enough that you could drive a car through it. And then on the other side of the room, maybe 20 feet away, we have a garage door type door, big bay door that's open. Now, a fly gets into the room with us, and he buzzes around, and when he realizes that there's nothing in this room for him, he makes a decision that he's getting out of there. He sees the big glass window. He sees the environment on the other side of the glass window and knows in his little fly mind that that is outdoors and that's where he belongs, and he can go fly out there and find something that's interesting to him to eat or whatever it is that flies do. So he flies toward that window and he slams his little fly face into the window and falls onto the windowsill. Now he's confused because he has no idea what just happened. But he was taught from the time he was a very young fly that if at first you don't succeed, try again. So he gets back up, he dusts himself off, he gathers up more speed, and with all of his little fly might, he slams his little fly face into the window again to the same result. And he figures, I'm just not trying hard enough. So he continues trying harder and harder with every subsequent attempt to fly through that window into the outside world. And he does this over and over and over and over again until eventually he falls onto the windowsill dead from exhaustion. When all he really had to do was turn around and fly in the other direction, out the garage door and into the freedom that he desired. Now that's a kind of a silly way to look at it, but how many of us are so locked into the idea of if I just try harder with this plan, I know I'll succeed because that's what I was taught, when the actual door that we need to go through to get to where we want to be is on the other side of the direction, is in the opposite direction of where we're looking. So before we try harder, let's make sure that the plan we have is actually going to work. Let's make sure that the activities that we're doing are actually working towards our goal and not just hard work. Because it's very easy for us to get caught up in the glamorization of hard work and think that just because we're working really hard that we're moving in a direction we want to go, when in fact we're like that fly slamming against the window. He worked really hard. In fact, he worked himself to death, but his plan wasn't sound. When all he had to do was make one minor adjustment, and that was to change the direction that he was putting his effort. And flying through that garage door would have been pretty much effortless for him. He dies not from lack of trying, but from lack of awareness. And if you don't get anything else from me, I want you to know that you can succeed in anything that you want to do if you achieve the proper level of awareness in regards to that thing. And if you don't achieve the proper level of awareness, then you're not going to succeed in it. Another way to put this is to release the parking brake before we stomp on the gas pedal. Now, how do we do that? How do we figure out what the appropriate plan is? Well, let's take a look at this quote here for a moment. The clarity with which we define something is what determines its usefulness. So if you don't know what something means, it's really not very useful to you. I could talk to you about the particulars of breaking chains or bending steel, and if you don't know what the measurements of a particular piece of steel mean, for example, then you won't know if that's, you don't have a reference point for it. You don't know if it's impressive or not. You don't know if it's strong or not. You don't know if it's hard to do or not because it's an unclear definition. I'm sure that just about anybody on this call could sit down and start talking about investments and financial matters and insurance policies with me, and I would have no idea what you're talking about because that's not my area of expertise. And that's why I would hire an expert like one of you, is to clearly define what it is that I need in terms of financial help, financial planning, in order to make that plan useful for me. So that brings us to the question, what exactly is success? Everyone wants to be successful, and if we were in a room full of and looking at each other face to face right now, I would ask you who wants to be successful, and undoubtedly every one of you would raise your hand. Then I would ask you, Well, what does success mean? Do you have a clear, concise, repeatable definition of what it means to be a success? And what I found is that very few people do. For the longest time, I didn't. And it was through this course of study of these mind masters that I came to understand a clear definition of what it means to be a success and be able to relate that in a repeatable way. Now, if you ask people what does it mean what is success, what does it mean to be successful, you're likely to get as many answers from people as you are the people that you ask. But usually it's very vague. People say they want to be happy. Well, what does being happy mean? People say they want to have more money. Well, how much more money? Because if I give you 50 cents, then you have more money than you had, but are you then successful? Does that match up with your definition of success? So let's look at a definition of success that I use. I didn't come up with this. I got it from a guy named Earl Nightingale, and it is a very, very useful definition of success that anyone can use. And it is simply this: success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Now, to put that in a different term, in a different way of saying it, you can say that the person who knows where they are, knows where they want to be, and is actively taking measures to move toward that is successful. But let's analyze this word by word and get as much clarity as we possibly can with it. Let's look at the first word, progressive. Going forward or onward successively from one member of a series to the next, or proceeding step by step. All too often, I think that we decide that we want to achieve a particular thing and then don't really know what a step by step process to get there is. And so we don't know if we're actually making progress, because we can work step by step by step and actually be covering a lot of ground, but it's not really that apparent. It's that seed with that flower that I talked about earlier. We plant that, and it takes it 3 weeks before the seed germinates enough to break ground. We could easily look at the ground and think, nothing's happening here. The seed's not doing anything. When in fact, just a few inches below the surface, the seed is doing what it needs to do. It's opening up and it's growing. And at the time that it's supposed to break the surface of the ground, it will. If we look at that from a financial standpoint, how many people want to retire with a certain amount of money in a nest egg? And they think that the only way to do that is to win the lotto, when in fact, if they set up a budget and they are intelligent in allocating a certain percentage of their income every single month or every single week, no matter what, it automatically goes into some sort of investment, then they don't have to try hard to save that money anymore. They don't have to put any effort into saving that money anymore because they've set it up to happen automatically. So progressive is just moving step by step from where we are toward where we want to go. The next part of that, realization, the being made real of something imagined or planned. So if we have this idea of financial independence, if we have this idea of a certain physical size or a certain body weight or fitting into a certain size clothing, or in a case like mine, if I have the idea of lifting a certain amount of weight in a particular way, first we have to imagine that. And in that imagining, it's the initial bit of the creation. Once we imagine it in our mind, then it's created. Now we just have to make it real. We have to bring it into being. We have to realize it. To make real is to realize. So progressive, step by step realization, bringing from the imagined into the physical. Worthy. This is the fun one. This is a fun one. Having adequate or great merit, character, or value. Is this idea worthy? Is it something that is going to make me a better person? Is it going to make the world a better place? And in fact, it's very easy at this point to look at something and think, am I worthy of this goal that I've set for myself? Am I able to do it? Is it possible? Am I good enough? When in fact, we should look at it the other way. I want you, instead of thinking, am I worth or am I worthy of being able to accomplish this ideal? I want you to think, is this ideal going to be something that is worth who I am? Because in order to achieve it, I'm going to have to change some things about who I am and how I think. I'm going to have to give up part of who I am right now. So is it worthy of me? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And if it isn't, then I want you to think a little bit bigger than what you're already thinking. A friend and mentor of mine named Alan Cosgrove once told me that if you spend an hour a day concentrating on something, within a year, you'll be very knowledgeable about it. Within 3 years, you'll be an expert at it. And within 5 years, you'll be world class at it. At just an hour a day. And his question was, do you want to be world class at these goals you've set for yourself, or do you want to be world class at watching reruns of Seinfeld? Because it's very easy to just sit down and plop in front of the television, and before you know it, an hour's gone by, and you haven't really done much. So, sure, you could easily become an expert on Seinfeld in just a very short period of time by watching it for an hour a day. Nothing wrong with Seinfeld. I think it's a great show, and I think the guy's very funny. But I don't think that becoming expert on someone else's television show is necessarily something that is worthy of me. And I hope that you don't think that it's worthy of you either. So, helping other people, making the world a better place, growing something important that's going to have an impact on other people and allow you to live your life as fully as you possibly can. That's worthy. And then, of course, the final word here is ideal. And it's the ultimate aim or objective, especially one of noble or high character. The way I like to define ideal is it's an idea that you've fallen in love with. Idea plus L, idea that you've fallen in love with. Because when you're in love with something, you don't have to try harder. If you're in a relationship with someone and you've fallen in love, you don't have to try really hard to think about them. If you have children, when your children are born, you don't have to try really hard to think about what it is that they need or what it is that you want to provide for them that's good. It just comes naturally. And that's what love really is a certain resonance, a certain harmony in the way that you think in relationship to something else. So whatever the idea is, if it gets you really fired up and you fall in love with that ideal, then that is the direction that you can progressively realize. So to summarize that whole thing, success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So I hope that whatever your ideal is that you're throwing around in your mind is something that is truly worthy of you. And that ideal, that worthy ideal, is another way to say superhuman power for me. So how do we get there? How do we become successful? Well, success and failure are born of the same energy. And just like my example earlier of spending an hour a day watching television versus spending an hour a day learning about the thing that you really want to know about or practicing the thing that you really want to get good at, that energy comes from the same place. And the primary cause for success or failure in all of us is our self-image. And I'll tell people this and they'll hear it from me for the first time and they'll immediately tell me, oh yeah, I've got a terrible self-image. Or sometimes people say, oh, my self-image is great, but I'm still failing. Well, let's take a look at what that self-image really means, because our success in any undertaking can never be greater than the image that we have of ourselves. And this goes really, really deep into how we were raised and how we were programmed from a very early age, from birth, really, by our parents, by the other people around us, by various media sources, television, radio for people who are my age, obviously the internet for younger people now, and even adults now. We're still receiving information that can directly affect our self-image from the internet and from other sources. And our self-image was unconsciously formed from past experiences. We are the product of someone else's habitual way of thinking. If we grew up thinking that we were going to do well at things, chances are we do well with them. If we grew up being told that we're not good enough, or that we're not smart enough, or that we'll never amount to anything, then chances are that's what we wound up becoming. Because for the first 5 to 7 years of life, our brains are in a particular state called theta brainwaves. This is the same brainwave that as adults we would go and seek to get into, to be hypnotized, to correct a bad habit, or to achieve a particular thing through hypnosis. We intentionally would get put into theta brainwaves. Well, little kids, from the time they're born up until they're 7 years old or so, are perpetually in this theta brainwave. And so they can learn more with less effort at those early ages than they can at any other point in their lives. And that's true of all of us. If you want someone, if you really want to learn how to speak 2 or 3 or more different languages, the best time to start is before you know how to talk. Now, the people who raised us did the best they could with what they had, but chances are they didn't have any clue as to what our actual potential was. And so we pick up a lot of really good stuff, but we also pick up limitations that were implanted in our caretakers subconsciously that they might not even be aware of. And so through their habitual thinking, our paradigms are formed, and that becomes the way that we think. How many of us now think, "Oh, I'm not a morning person," or "Oh, I can't lose weight no matter what I do"? And we think that way because we were taught to think that way, and which sounds pretty grim, right? Until we come to the absolute fact that no matter what our self-image is, no one and nothing can prevent us from improving our self-image. And so the same way that our self-image was formed, our self-image can be reformed to match up with our worthy ideal. And if we're daily practicing something that is reforming that self-image, that moves us in the direction of that worthy ideal, then we are progressively realizing our worthy ideal. And from day one, from the very first time that that decision's made to move in that direction, start taking those steps, we become successful immediately. Success isn't something that's at the end of this. Success is something that is a state of mind that allows us to grow. The trite old expression is the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The logical continuation of that is the journey of 1,000 miles is made up of thousands upon thousands of single steps. So what is the next small step that I can take today, right now, that's going to move me progressively toward the realization of my worthy ideal? Improving the self-image is that step. Now, the 3-step formula that all of this comes down to, that I use in my coaching, that I wrote about in the book, is we start with inspiration. So for me, that was the Hulk and superheroes when I was a kid. It's when we have that spark of an idea and we fall in love with that idea. And even though we have no idea how we're going to be able to do it, we just can't let go of it, or it can't let go of us. We have that spark of an idea. Eventually, even if we don't know how we're going to be able to pull it off, we start to believe that it can be possible, especially if we see someone else who's done it. And so when we see someone else who's done this thing, then it starts to become more and more possible, just like what I talked about earlier with Lou Ferrigno. I saw that it could be possible, and I started looking at the attributes of various influences, and of course, mentors that would move me in that direction. And I talked about my mentors. I talked about Dennis Rogers, Slim the Hammerman, etc. Who is your mentor? Who is your influence? Is what you're learning from these people moving you progressively toward your worthy ideal? That's what inspiration is all about. Now, once we become inspired and we start to choose those attributes of the mentors, this is when the real fun starts. This is when we get to utilize the greatest superhuman power that all of us as humans have, and that's the power of imagination. Imagination is the ability to form images in your mind. One of the mind masters that I studied, named Neville Goddard, said that man's only limitation is weakness of attention and poverty of imagination. So dream big. If you're not dreaming big, then you're trying to play it safe and you're not thinking about inspiration. You're thinking of, okay, this sounds reasonable. This sounds realistic. I think I can probably do this. If that's the case, and you feel pretty confident you can do it, dream a little bit bigger. I mean, you're listening to a guy who bends steel wrenches with his hands. And a few years ago, before I saw that done, I thought, there's no way I'd be able to do that. It never entered into my mind. And now I do it as a matter of practice. So dream big. Joe Vitale says that your dream should excite you a lot and scare you a little bit. So if you're not a little bit scared, then you're not dreaming big enough. This is when you start to believe through this dreaming that it's possible not only for someone else to do it, but it's possible for you to do it. Because if one person can do it, then another person can do it. Because the human power of imagination is what has brought us everything that exists. I want you to think for a moment, if we went back in time just 50 years and tried to explain to someone from 50 years ago that there would be this device that would throw these signals through the air and you would be able to hear a person in another city, maybe even in another country, another part of the world, talk, and you'd be able to see the images that this person was putting on a screen, they'd say, oh, you're out of your mind. It's crazy. If you go back 100 years or 150 years, then you'd be burned at the stake for witchcraft. And yet here we are. All of us are sharing information in the way that I described because someone somewhere along the way imagined that it was possible. The next thing you're going to do is construct that vision. What does it actually look like? The end picture of what that worthy ideal looks like. Because if you can see you doing it, your subconscious mind, where your self-image resides, doesn't know the difference between something that's real and happening to you right now, something that's a memory that happened to you in the past, or something that you're imagining to create in the future. There is no time in the subconscious. Your self-image does not recognize time. It only recognizes repetition. And the more detailed your vision and the more repetition you have written in the present tense in as much detail as possible, the more likely it is to embed into your self-image. I say write it in the present tense because the most powerful words that you can say are I am. Anything that comes after I am is a creative act. To say I am implies that it's existing in the now. To say I will or I'm going to or I plan to or I want to or anything like that puts it in the future. And so the subconscious mind and the self-image thinks, well, okay, that's not now, that's some other time. So it's not. It just isn't if it's not now to the subconscious. So write it in as much detail and in the present tense. Once you have that vision, now it's time to take action. And taking action is fairly simple. The first thing I want you to do is study. Whatever area of expertise you want to get better at, study it. Set aside time every day and study that information. It could be having communication with a mentor. It could be reading books. It could be taking classes. Just like our example of financial independence earlier, if I make monthly investments of a small amount over a long period of time, it adds up. If I make daily investments of study and self-improvement, even if it's only 15 minutes a day, More is better in a case like this, obviously, referencing back to our Seinfeld idea earlier. But daily study every single day until it becomes habitual adds up over time. The flip side of the coin of study is practice, because knowing without doing is not knowing. You can read the books about financial investment, but if you don't ever actually talk to someone about setting up the accounts, then all you have is a bunch of knowledge and no money. I can read books and watch videos of guys lifting weights and doing feats of strength, but if I don't actually go pick up the barbell or grab the piece of steel and put the time in to practice, I don't ever actually accomplish anything. And then the final thing that I want you to do is share. Once you get familiar with it, once you've studied and once you started picking up a little bit of expertise or a little bit of ability at whatever it is that you're practicing, share it. You can just talk to other people about it. You might write a book of your own based on the information that you've collected. You might see that there is a hole in the environment of where the information that you've collected that has worked for you to help you to become a better person, to achieve your worthy ideal. You can organize it in such a way that it resonates with other people. None of the information that I'm talking about today is new, and none of it's actually mine. But I have put it together in such a way that it's worked for me, and I have shared it with other people in such a way that they've told me that they had heard all of it before, but it never really hit home with them until they heard the way that I explained it. And that's not to toot my own horn. That's simply to illustrate that everyone learns differently. Everyone picks up on things differently. And there's different points in our lives that we're ready to receive the information. And when you share that information, not only do you get to practice and learn it and reinforce everything with it all over again, but you also get to plant a seed in someone else's mind. See, James Allen wrote in a book back in 1903, I believe, that mind is the master power that molds and makes. And mankind, not male, but mankind is mind. And evermore we take the tool of thought, and shaping what we will brings forth 1,000 joys or 1,000 ills. We think in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but the looking glass. So whatever we think about, we bring about. And what I want you guys to do going forward from here is to just proceed as though success is inevitable, knowing that you have this superhuman power of imagination, and that through just a little bit of dedicated practice, not a lot of hard work, but a little bit of dedicated study and practice, you can achieve whatever worthy ideal you've set up for yourself. That's all I have for you right now. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dave. That was fantastic. We will open it up for questions right now, and my screen just went away, so now I can't see if there are questions in the queue. So while my computer hopefully comes back up, it just died. Can we start with the first question? How do I know what my superhuman powers are?
Well, traditionally in fantasy stories and comic books, superhuman powers have been these things like being bulletproof or super strength or flying through the air. Obviously, in the reality that we live, most of those things kind of fall short in being something that we can attain because of the physical limitations of the world that we live in. But if we look a little bit deeper and we ask the question, what is it about superheroes that is so fascinating to us? If we look at the big blockbuster movies like the Avengers and Justice League and Star Wars and all that kind of stuff, they're always huge smash hits because people identify with the characters in there. And everyone has their favorite character in a movie like that. And I believe that the reason we choose those favorite characters is because we see something of ourselves in that character. Well, a superhuman power that we can develop in the world that we live in is something that is going to allow us to take whatever part of ourself we feel really good about and express it more fully. And it's going to allow us to live a very full and happy life because we're expressing it more fully. And ultimately, if it's truly a superhuman power, it's going to make the world a better place because other people are going to be able to benefit from that superhuman power. And that's the important distinction that I make, because with superheroes, we also have supervillains. We have these villains who have these powers and they don't use them to make the world a better place. So anything that makes our lives a better place is a superpower, and it's used for good. And if anything that we use that we're especially good at and it makes our lives or someone else's life less good is not you're not a superhero anymore. You're a supervillain at that point. So whatever makes you be the best you can be and helps everyone else around you become the best that they can be is superhuman power. And we all have it. It's just a matter of figuring out what it is.
That's great advice and good timing with all the superhero movies out. Are there any? I'm going to put one more call out. If we have any other questions, type them in the box on the chat box on your screen, and I will ask another question. You had mentioned, inspiration, idea, and then that power of visualizing it, imagining it.
Sure.
So in the past, I know I've heard that from other speakers in different words, affirmations, that kind of thing. How do you suggest that we use things like affirmations to support achieving our, superhuman feats?
Sure. Well, first of all, the question itself reminds me of a conversation that I had with someone who had read my book and had read a bunch of books of that nature, self-help, personal development, whatever you want to call it. And I was having a conversation with the guy, and he's like, "I'm with you on everything except the affirmations. I'm just not an affirmation guy. I've tried it. It didn't work. I knew it wasn't going to work, but I tried it anyway, and I'm just not an affirmation guy." And my reply to that was, that's an affirmation, and it's working. Because no matter what you write down on a card or in a book or on sticky notes and stick all over the place, if you read that affirmation and think, that's not true, that's not going to work, then you immediately pull the rug out from under it. So in order to have an affirmation or a visualization practice that really, really works, we talked about this a little bit. You write it in the present tense, and you think about it in such a way that you're not just looking at it and then arguing with yourself that, yes, I want to do this, but no, I won't be able to do it. Because when you set that conflict up, the stronger thought wins. And the stronger thought is usually the one that says you won't be able to, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't try to change that part of your personality anyway. The thing that works best, in my experience, is to be able to not only write it out in detail, but to actually construct a scene that would imply that whatever it is you want to accomplish has already happened. So let's say that you wanted a particular promotion at your job. You might construct a scene in your mind to support the affirmation of I am going to, or I am, and then you write in whatever the name of the position is, right? To support that, you construct this scene of maybe a colleague or a superior at your office or a family member giving you a hug and congratulating you and saying, "Wow, man, congratulations. I'm so happy for you that you got the promotion." And put yourself in a really relaxed frame of mind. Actually, right before you fall asleep is the absolute best time to do this. If you fall asleep playing the scene of someone congratulating you on achieving this particular success over and over and over again, and it should be a really short, very, very concise scene. Imagine maybe someone shaking your hand and saying congratulations, or maybe someone giving you a hug and saying, "That's awesome. I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it." And then you drift off into sleep while you're playing that scene over and over in your mind. Then after you go to sleep, your conscious mind sort of shuts off, but your subconscious mind continues to work. And your subconscious mind will play around with that imagined scene throughout the entire night while you sleep. And it will actually accept that scene as something that's true because you've set it up in such a way that you're having the experience. I mean, we've all done the thing where we can sit down and remember a particular experience and it's very vivid in our mind. We can create experiences in our mind using our imagination that are as vivid as any memory that we have, as long as we practice using our imagination. So that would be what I would recommend anybody do to support an affirmation. You figure out what the worthy ideal is. You write out the affirmation that literally says, I am this worthy ideal. And then you construct that scene. And don't construct a whole bunch of scenes, and don't construct a very long 20-minute scene that's going because you'll lose attention there. The shorter, more concise that scene can be, the more effective it's going to be. And then replay that multiple times during the day. Like every time you take your card with your affirmation on it and you read it, replay that scene in your mind. But especially right before you go to sleep, just replay it over and over and over again. And if you doubt the effectiveness of this, I want you to think about a time when you have been at home alone late at night watching a scary movie on Netflix, and then you go to bed and you hear noises and you'd swear up and down someone's in your house, and you start like your heart rate increases and you start getting sweaty and breathing heavy, and there's nothing changed except what was in your own imagination. You start to imagine things that aren't there. Well, if it works that way to do things that can make us feel fear, then it can absolutely work in the other way. So imagine that scene over and over as you're falling asleep, and then don't be surprised when it actually happens exactly the way you imagined it.
Excellent. Well, we are running towards the end of our time here, so I'd like to finish by asking you to challenge our WIFS members with some kind of call to action. How can they implement what you've shared with us today?
Okay, today is January 9th, correct?
Yes.
I'm looking at my calendar. Yeah, January 9th. I would challenge you to spend the next 3 days constructing whatever your worthy ideal is going to be. Give it some thought. Schedule some time to sit down and actually construct what the worthy ideal is, to construct an affirmation in the present tense of I am this worthy ideal, and to create this scene. Write it out on paper in as much detail as possible between now and Saturday. And then on Sunday, when you lay down to go to sleep, play that image in your mind. Play it in your mind over and over again, that scene, and do it every night from the 13th, which is Sunday, until March 1st, which is just a little over 6 weeks. If you do
Great.
this, if you do this for the rest of the month of January and the entire month of February, I promise you, if you're diligent with it, you won't have to try really hard to accomplish anything, but strange things will start to happen that will seem like a coincidence, but they're not coincidences. It's because you've programmed your mind to start seeing the opportunities instead of the obstacles. And then when the opportunity presents itself, move on it. The universe loves speed. Move on the opportunity. Don't second guess it. If it's in line with your I am, and if it's in line with your worthy ideal and the vision that you've set for what that end is going to be like, move on it. It's the right thing to do, I promise.
Excellent. I've often heard the universe aligns to support you once you've made that decision. So great advice.
Absolutely.
David, we thank you so much for your commitment to providing WIFS members with quality programming. We will be sending our audience a brief post-program survey, and we ask that you take a moment to complete the questions. Your feedback is of great value and helps us in planning future programming. We'd like to thank our corporate sponsors for supporting women in the industry. And please visit the WIFS website to access today's presentation, past webinars. We do have all of them recorded and posted in our archives. And register for our February education webinar on the 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This webinar is now ending, and we thank you all for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you.